Okay, good evening, friends. I'm not taking radicalism today, I'll take radicalism tomorrow. So, I will be starting with welfare approach. Just 1 minute. So, today we'll be dealing with two topics, and that is the welfare approach and environmentalism. Okay, so there was this question which we had to talk about. Development of the concept of place led to a paradigm shift in human geography. Comment. So if we talk about answer of this, it was essentially a short note, and we have already talked about when there is a keyword like paradigm shift, what we have to essentially talk about. Okay, so we also have to show the shift. So can we say that beginning of 1970s saw emergence of the concept of place, which replaced the prevailing paradigm of location और which replaced the prevailing concept लिखो यहाँ पे concept of location, thereby starting a new paradigm in geography. Okay, so tell me what were the areas where we'll be talking about? Can I say I will write my next statement as concept of place changed the approach comma methodology as well as the subject matter of geography or human geography, because in the question it was human geography. So tell me, can I say first I'll talk about approach? Yes or no? So you will be talking about approach. Here also you could have used a chart. It is up to you. And if I talk about approach, I would definitely say that between 1950 to 1960, or sorry 70, geography was dominated by which approach? There was location, idea of location, which was dominated by which approach? Positivism approach, which was based upon approach of positivism, and it followed the nomothetic way of understanding. But very clearly, with the development of place concept, it changed. Rather than positivism, it based itself upon existential phenomenology approach, and essentially it followed an ideographic way of studying the phenomena. So approach, then we can also talk about with respect to methodology. So during the quantitative revolution period, locational approach was based upon scientific methodology, following the more specifically deductive method. But very clearly with humanistic geography and with development of the concept of place, it followed philosophical methodology, and very clearly the methodology was based upon interviews, discussions, critical literary reviews, empathy, ठीक है. So these were the type of methods which were utilized. Other भी उसमें लिख सकते हो. For example, you can add iconography. So it was different with respect to the methodology. Then there was difference with respect to the subject matter. So during in locational science, subject matter of study was what? What was the essential subject matter of study? It was essentially economic aspects of human beings. Very clearly what it did, it neglected the normative characteristics of humans. We know very well that place as a concept is inclusive of, it includes the sense of place. That is the meanings that humans attach with locations. So this is what? This is the key focus of study. ठीक है. So very clearly we can say that place, unlike, conclusion लिख सकते हैं लास्ट में, unlike the earlier paradigm of location, has continued to dominate geographical studies even after demise of humanistic paradigm. This can be our conclusion. ठीक है. Are we clear about this? So whose answer was, फालतू में क्यों मेंशन करना बिहेवियरल ज्योग्राफी? Are you very smart? Are you very talented that you have to show to the examiner कि मेरे को ये भी आता है, मेरे को ये भी आता है? Empty vessels make more noises. Always remember, जितनी ज़रूरत है बस उतना लिखो, not more than that. Okay. So let us talk about our today's topics. One very important aspect is that of welfare approach. So we have already talked about the origin of the welfare approach. So see here, yes Ashish, that was also you can do. Yesterday also we, in a way, we already wrote that answer. How many changes were there? I just here focused upon the key word, that is paradigm. So मैंने 3 ही पॉइंट से लिख दिया. If you want, you can write more points using a table. It is up to you. Okay. So welfare approach was born out of social reform movement of 1960s. ठीक है. And the social reform movement was critical of quantitative revolution approach. And यहाँ पर reform actually में लिखा हुआ है. It should not be reform, it should be relevance. So इसको correct कर लो. Here also. So it is social relevance movement. The social relevance movement was critical of quantitative revolution approach as it could not provide any solutions to the various problems confronting the society, including the political, cultural, environmental problems as well as economic inequality or the welfare problems. So we have already talked about this in lots of detail. So you know that the period of 1960s was highly turbulent period, and this period ultimately led to what? Led to emergence of this welfare approach. So in fact, late 60s was a period when there was a social relevance movement which was going on. And this social relevance movement very clearly affected geography as well. So it was also ongoing within geography. So academicians, if you talk about particularly, were very much interested as well as actively took part in this movement. And very clearly it asked that what is the need for these studies if they cannot help, if they cannot find the solutions to the problems of the society. Okay? So one factor which led to development of, if I talk about, if we use our way of understanding, so origin of welfare approach. So we already know that origin of any new approach is product of one, changes in the social environment. So यहाँ पर जो लिखा हुआ है, this point, it is all about what was the change which was taking place in the social environment which led to this. In fact, we will see that welfare approach had common history of evolution with the radical approach. In fact, in the late 60s period, both welfare approach and radical approach was same. Bye the. And they asked the similar type of question. And the question was related with dealing with the problems faced by society, primarily the problem of inequality. They both saw that this inequality is the key issue which confronts the society, and if we have to deal with other problems, first we have to deal with inequality. So both of them were single school of thought during this period. We will see that by early 70s, there was split between them. So there were people like Harvey. What they did, they adopted Harvey, Pete, several others. They adopted Marxist approach and clearly declared themselves as Marxist geographers. while there were others who didn't do that because they wanted geography to remain neutral and not become political. So these others came to be known as the welfare approach. Okay? Very clearly you can understand from the name, as the name suggests, what is the key of welfare approach? Key of welfare approach is that it wants welfare of the people. In other words, it wants to measure the inequality in the world, map the inequality in the world, so that this inequality can be highlighted and this problem can be taken care by the politicians. Okay? Welfare approach is a school of thought which had belief in the system. They believed that the main problem was that the politicians were not aware of the problem. So the main aspect of geographers was to do what? To ultimately make sure that we are able to bring forward this problem so that the politicians can see this problem and would be able to ultimately solve this problem. They believed, they were liberal in their approach. They believed that capitalism, with required modifications in capitalism, we would be able to solve these problems of inequality and other issues in the society. Okay? Thus, they didn't take sides with the radicals, and radicals became they adopted a different type of approach. So they became extremist, while welfare approach remained a moderate. Okay? So, however, the decade of 1970s saw emergence of welfare approach which separated itself from the radical position. They took more moderate position which was based upon belief system, you see. And what was the belief system? One, adequacy of contemporary politico-economic system and the modes of production. So they believed that this system, the problem was not with the system. Radicals were the people who thought that the system is broken, so we need to replace the system. While welfare, they were more liberal in their approach. Liberal is those people who believe in the capitalistic system. So they were liberal in their approach. They believe there is no problem with capitalism. The problem is that several problems are unknown. So whatever is the problem, it can be just solved. Some modifications would do it. Second, the idea that geographers should remain neutral and should not associate themselves with any political ideology. So they didn't like radicals attaching themselves with Marxism. Third, the belief that geographers' primary role was to highlight the problems of welfare, that is the spatial inequality, and they need not become policy makers. Okay? So it was believed that policy makers are unaware of these problems, and if these problems are brought to their notice, they would attempt to solve these problems. Based on these belief systems, welfare geographers refused to take the radical positions and essentially attempted to map what was their main task. What they did, they mapped welfare based upon socio-economic variables. Initially, they used variables which were mainly used by contemporary economists, which were nothing but measures of consumption. However, by late 70s, broad variables of quality of life was developed and developed to attempt welfare mapping. Okay? So this is what is welfare geography. If we have to write about origin, one thing we saw that change in the social environment, there were changes in academic environment. So changes in academic environment was what? There was emergence of a new branch of welfare economics, welfare economics. You must have heard about welfare economics, like Amartya Sen is basically what? He is a welfare economist. Jean Dries, he is also what? He is a welfare economist. So at that time, this period after Second World War, it saw emergence of a new branch of study which was referred to as welfare economics. And one of the fathers of this welfare economics was Harold Laswell. Harold Laswell. And Harold Laswell, he coined a phrase, who gets what, when, and how. What, when, and how. So according to him, this was the crux of welfare economic studies. So this had influence on geographers as well. Influence on geographers as well. In fact, to be more particular, it was स्मिथ. अभी हम स्मिथ के बारे में बात करेंगे. He was very much affected by this welfare economics. Then if you talk about the third thing is the changes in academic environment of geography. Okay. So changes in the academic environment of geography, we'll see that the academic environment of geography saw rise of some pioneer scholars who became the forebearers of welfare geography. And we will see here, like for example, can you see David M. Smith? He was British geographer who ultimately was very key to development of that. Other, if you talk about, was Richard Morrell. So two names that you have to essentially use is Smith and Morrell. So examples of these are D.M. Smith and in fact it is said that rise and fall of welfare geography is associated with beginning and end of the academic career of Smith. Academic career of Smith. So Smith was the primary person who ultimately led to the development of this welfare geography. And as we said, the second person was Richard Morrell. Richard Morrell. So इनके बारे में देखते हैं अब. So Smith, if we talk about, he was a British geographer who can be considered as the prime mover of this approach. He adopted welfare approach from the field of welfare economics, reflecting the critical mood of the time. He remarked, however we define geography, there are now sound logical reasons for studying many social phenomena. Smith tried to incorporate the geographical element into welfare approach. Already welfare economic approach which was there, he tried to incorporate the geographical. He saw that in the welfare economic approach, there was lack of geographical element. The spatial element was missing. So he tried to add that spatial element in that approach. Thus the question which was asked by Harold Laswell, who gets what, when and how, was converted to study of who gets what, where and how by Smith. Okay? So this is the key question of welfare geography. Who gets what, where and how. Thus he remarked, many of these phenomena show more extreme areal variation and are stronger criteria of areal differentiation than some of the physical and economic criteria which had traditionally been used. Okay. Thus, Smith made an important attempt to position this focus on social phenomena as the logical extension of Hartsonian attempt to the discipline, one that is preoccupied with criteria of differentiating the world into regions, but also one that accorded little role in regard to anything remotely social. Okay? So, देखो, what here it is saying is that Smith was critical of number of things. Smith was critical of the QR approach and believed that generalizations would not be able to solve the problems of spatial inequality and social justice. Okay, that's what he felt, that better way was what, according to him, more appropriate approach was the areal differentiation approach. Areal differentiation approach. However, he saw this, the Hartson's areal differentiation approach as very rigid approach, very rigid. So he tried to bring two changes in this approach. And what were the two changes? One was with respect to the criteria used for areal differentiation. So one was the criteria used by Hartson less relevant to social problems. more mechanical type of criteria was used. Thus, he wanted to change and base it on criteria of goods and bads in the society. I'll explain this concept of goods and bads abhi thodi der mein. So, goods and bads in the society. So, goods like, for example, how much employment people are getting, etc., etc. Bad can be discrimination, corruption, etc. So, thus such type of criteria he wanted to do areal differentiation. Okay. So, basically through this what he wanted to do, ultimate aim was to do welfare mapping. Using areal differentiation. So, that is one type of change he brought. Second type of change that he wanted to bring was that Smith was not against use of quantitative methods. ठीक है. He stood for objectivity. Thus, he wanted to use quantitative methods to formulate objective criteria to measure welfare. Objective criteria to measure welfare. For example, tell me, can we say that HDI, for example, take the case of HDI, Human Development Index. So, are we using a quantitative method? Isn't it an arithmetic mean of 3 variables which include income, education and health? Yes or no? So, he wanted to do what? He wanted to reach to he felt that this measurement of welfare can be made objective and this can be done by use of quantitative methods. So, he was not against quantitative methods. He was not against objectivity, unlike the case of the previous areal differentiation. So, Smith's approach also brought spatial science into play in an attempt to create objective measures of inequality. He used formal tools of neoclassical economics to characterize the exact contour of welfare. The Smith's approach can be rightly called as synthetic and multi-dimensional approach. Smith wrote 2 books to put forward his ideas. One was Human Geography, a Welfare Approach in 1977. Second, Where the Grass is Greener, Living in an Unequal World in 1979. So, this was the attempts which were being done by D.M. Smith. There were others in the British school. If you remember, British school from quite some time it was already applied. याद है हमने ब्रिटिश स्कूल के बारे में क्या पढ़ा था? What kind of approach we associated British school with? Anyone? If you remember, we associated it with specialist regionalism. याद है? It was not only regional, it was specialist regional. And what was the key of specialist regional approach? That geographers used to spend their entire academic career in study of one region. And primary reason was because they were more applied in their orientation, or they wanted to understand every aspect of the area so that they would be in a position to ultimately provide solutions to the many problems which were being faced in that area or region. So this type of trend of application, problem solving was already there in the British geography, and these people specifically put it in the welfare sense. So one of such other people was, there was a book written by Regional Variations in Britain by B.E. Coates and E.M. Rostron, and was published in 1971. They tried to divide geographical counties of UK on the basis of variations in the range of key economic and social indicators like personal income, employment rates, medical and dental services, education, etc. ठीक है. Authors propose that they were refining regional idea by using statistical evidence relevant to planning and policy. Similarly, in 1977, another book was written by in the form of Geography and Inequality by B.E. Coates along with Johnson and Knox, seeking to use objective social indicators to trace spatial inequality across UK, US, France, India and other world regions, including criteria like housing, education, nutrition and healthcare. Here Coates concludes with a note that inequality is bad. So there were others who also did some of this welfare mapping. This is welfare mapping is what? It is part and parcel of the welfare approach in geography. Okay. So there were some others also who were involved in Britain. Welfare approach was most developed in Britain, but it was not only developed in Britain, it was also developed elsewhere, and one area was US. So in US, number of welfare based articles investigating into geographies of inequality was published in the Radical Journal of Geography. It was Antipode. We later see that Antipode was a radical journal which was published, and it was very key journal which paved the way for development of radical geography. And many articles, because as we talked about before, welfare and radical geography have common evolution. So many articles of welfare geography were also, because they were talking about the same problem, only the perspectives were different. So the problem of inequality. So they were published in Antipode. In US, it was Richard Morrill, most influential geographer. Yes, Morrill is same. Morrill is same. That same Morrill. Most influential geographer associated with the welfare approach. Later on, he changed his position. He outlined the possible role of geography in transformation of society. He insisted that we have responsibility to ask questions about rightness, as there is extreme imbalance between groups and areas, particularly in terms of job availability and income levels. He called upon geographers to be active in combating spatial inequalities in employment, resources, wealth, and to advocate against poverty, racism, pollution, and mistreatment of scenic and historical landscapes. Like Smith, Morrill too deliberately abstained from advocating any sort of social revolution. So he also didn't go with the radicals. He also stopped at a particular point. He drew boundary that geographers should not be crossing this boundary. Okay? So these were all the people who were basically involved in the development of welfare approach. But one name we'll be using throughout it is D.M. Smith. He is the key person in the development of welfare approach. ठीक है. So now let's talk little bit about the conceptual framework of welfare approach. So if we have to understand welfare approach, we have to first understand welfare approach is based upon two key ideas. Upon two key concepts, and these two key concepts are the concepts of social injustice and spatial inequality. Social injustice and spatial inequality. So, if we talk about social injustice, that we know that in most societies, there is presence of winners and losers. There is presence of winners and losers. And why there is presence of this two groups? Because these are result of operation of social, economic and political relationships. Social, economic and political relationships over which they have little control. ठीक है. So see, if you talk about this idea of social injustice, society has its own some economic, social and political ways, that is relationships, and they would always, in almost all societies will be finding that they would always be tilted more towards some group. They would always be more in favor of certain groups or societies or people or individuals. And as a result of which, what we will be finding, there would emerge this phenomena of winners or losers would be ultimately emerging. Okay? And these relationships also keep on changing. Thus, the definitions of winners and losers can also keep on changing. Like अभी मुझे याद है recently, after this elections in Bihar, I think 2-3 days back only, Nitish Kumar gave one statement, and he gave one statement with respect to the situation of Bihar, the backwardness of Bihar, and he said that Bihar was backward because it was away from the sea, away from the coast. So the states which have coastline, they are more developed. So we'll later see that theoretically what he is saying is correct, because if you are more near to the sea, you will have ports, etc., you will have diffusion of information, and ultimately there would be more development. But again, he is wrong in the sense that he seems to have not read history. His historical knowledge seems to be zero. And why I am saying this? Because if we just little bit go back, we will be finding that before the Britishers arrived in India, ultimately Bihar was one of the most prosperous states of India. It was one of the most prosperous states. Only after the Britishers arrived and they changed the political economic system of the management of the resources, then this type of poverty began to arise in Bihar. Backwardness began to prevail in Bihar. And very clearly what the successive governments have failed to do is to create a suitable type of socio-economic system which would lead to development of these areas or these backward areas. So they have failed to develop such kind of systems. In fact, you can understand even today our systems are more oriented towards industrialization. If you look into our politico-economic system, it is more, the development is more based on industrialization and urbanization. Okay? And if you follow this type of method of industrialization and urbanization, very, very clearly tell me, can I say that there would be some areas which would be more benefited? There would be other areas where the benefits would be less. So those areas which would be more benefited would become winners while others would become the losers. Take the example of, if we just talk about agriculture, for example. So tell me, can I say even today, although we are talking about second green revolution, even today, can we say that still our main method of agriculture development is based upon green revolution? Yes or no? Can we say that isn't it still based upon green revolution? Now, green revolution is something which has been very famously referred to as the package technology. So green revolution is basically what it is called as a package technology. So it requires what? It requires HYV, high yielding variety seeds, but seeds alone would not do anything. These seeds require lots of nutrients. So you require chemical fertilizers. Now, chemical fertilizers are highly concentrated. You cannot put them, otherwise they would damage the tissues of the plants. So to use these chemical fertilizers, what is required further? It is required that they should be diluted with application of lots of water. So there is requirement for water for irrigation. Now when you have put lots of nutrients, we have put lots of water. Can I say you have created an environment which is very suitable for growth of pests? That means you will also have to use chemical pesticides to control it, otherwise more problems would be arising. Okay. Again, this is not only sufficient. Once there is cultivation and harvest, the harvesting has to be done in what? All the agricultural operations have to be completed very fast. Then only these short maturing varieties you would be able to utilize properly. Because if you do the activities fast, then you will be in a position to grow again. So you will require, for many of these things which has to be done, you will require use of machinery and power. Overall, green revolution, we will later see that it is based upon the concept of intensification of inputs. Now tell me, if it is such a kind of package technology, can I say that it would create two groups where the rich farmers, big farmers, they would become the winners and the poor farmers, small and marginal farmers, they would become the losers. Yes or no? Tell me. Can we say that? This is what happened. Punjab very clearly was better prepared. It had larger fields. There were so many positive aspects related with Punjab. While in Bihar, the farmers were small and marginal farmers mostly. They were very poor, uneducated. Government support was very, very poor. As a result of which, what happened? They couldn't get the benefits of green revolution. Okay? So this is what we mean by the creation of winners and losers. If suppose, tell me, if suppose government tomorrow decides that we will apply, the investment today we are doing, the public investment which is going on, can I say that it is more towards industry? And towards agriculture, it is very low. Investment in agriculture is very, very low. Okay, you can understand. Simple सा एक, if you just are reading newspapers, many times it happens, particularly during the election years. There are election years or when there is droughts, etc., some natural hazard has come. So many times it happens that farmers demand the loan waiver. And many governments, in fact, many parties announce as their objective of the poll or of their agenda that they would be providing loan waiver to the farmers. And as soon as it is announced, have you seen that so many, if you see the news channels, so many of the so-called experts would come, particularly from the banking sector, and they would start saying ki no, this is not good for the fiscal discipline, this, that, and this would ultimately destroy the behavior of the people who are taking loan, and so many arguments they would give not to give this loan waiver. Have you seen that? But if government decides that we will give this subsidy, so much subsidy, is given to the industrial sector, so much, then there is no one coming out and talking that this is wrong, etc., etc. So much loans have been written off. Writing off loans is basically what? It is a kind of subsidy which has been given to these industries. So then nobody talks about that. So suppose tomorrow government decides that this resource which we were spending in industrial sector, this we are going to spend more in the agricultural sector. We are going to change this. Government becomes more rational and government thinks more from people's perspective and believes that we have done one mistake, and the mistake was that we didn't follow the steps of development. First, we should have ensured that our primary sector was efficiently working. Then we should have thought about strengthening our secondary sector and then tertiary sector. So tomorrow, if government ultimately decides that we'll spend more, we'll increase the spending in agriculture, we'll reform our agriculture sector. Like for example, one of the reforms that our agriculture sector needs is is a type of cooperative farming. Can I say that some of the areas which would benefit from this type of cooperative farming would be Bihar? Bihar has huge amount of land resource, very fertile soil, good amount of water resources available. ठीक है, good amount of water resources available, and as a result of which what happens, if we can go for cooperative farming, ultimately we will be finding that the chances that it would convert into commercial agriculture is very high. I'll explain when I'll talk about Marx ideology. There I'll explain all these things. Amit is saying, but people in their minds have made it agriculture as employment is low profile, not possible. Darshit is saying creates chaos. All these things have been fed in your mind. Everything is possible, only thing is you have to look for the solutions. And if one is saying that you have to ultimately give more resources to agriculture, it doesn't mean that you will not give resources to industry. Only thing is, we are saying that you stop the corruption which you are doing in the name of promotion of industries. You see, made in India, ठीक है, मेक इन इंडिया, सॉरी. सो मेक इन इंडिया का इन लोगों ने क्या बना के रख दिया? What they have done with Make in India? It is just a scheme of feeding the rich people. Why? Because these same rich people brought this government. These are the same rich people. In fact, tell me, if government was so much for development of industries, why they are not creating a kind of environment which is competitive? Why they are promoting only few entrepreneurs? Why they are only promoting some few industrial groups which are already very big? If you have to ultimately create better industrial environment, you'll have to create competitiveness. If you look into the Western countries, you'll be finding that most of the innovations that happen, most of these innovations actually come from the small and marginal industries. These are the people who are working very hard and they ultimately innovate. They are mostly involved in the innovation process. Government has created a suitable type of, yes, startups say. Governments in Western world has created a suitable type of working environment where they are in a position to innovate. It is other thing that some of these are bought by the big companies later on because they will pay hefty amounts to them, and ultimately these innovations would become, they would be bought by some MNC. That is other thing, but most of the innovations come from there. And how they are coming? Because there is a suitable environment. In India, we have just made joke of everything. It is a nexus, strong nexus between politicians and capitalists, even administrators. Tum log bhi, some of you would get selected and you will become very rich just because of this nexus, you will see. And no matter what you say, ultimately you will be part of that corruption. Okay? So this is what is the issue, that in most of the societies, the relations, the power relations, that is political relations, economic relations, cultural relations, social relations are more in favor of some groups at the expense of others. And this creates in a society the situation of winners and losers. ठीक है? So उसी में आगे हम लिखते हैं. So it involves the distinction within societies. distinction within societies between those able to wield power and acquire wealth. Wield power and acquire wealth, status and well-being. And those who are not. And those who are not. ठीक है. So this is what essentially creates the winners and losers in the society. And the second concept is the concept of spatial inequality. Spatial inequality. So if we talk about the spatial inequality, spatial variations in and proximity to social goods and we are here talking about that goods and bads which I was talking about. Social goods like such as access to knowledge, employment, income, housing, education or healthcare. Education or healthcare. To social goods and bads. So if you talk about bads, these include such as pollution, deprivation, social and political repression, or lack of knowledge. So there is spatial variation in and proximity to access to the social goods and bads. ठीक है. It is such that this variation is such that people in different places experience different level of goods and bads. different levels of goods and bads. ठीक है, so this creates spatial inequality. This creates spatial inequality. ठीक है, so this is the basic conception of spatial inequality. Taking this example of Bihar a little further, you can understand that why I was saying Nitish is totally wrong there, because he as a chief minister of the state should have more knowledge base of understanding these developmental phenomena. He very clearly doesn't understands that he is part and parcel of the problem. And how is part and parcel of the problem? We today have a model of development in India which is we call it, बाद में हम इसको बात करेंगे, and this model of development is the unbalanced model of development. Unbalanced model of development. So in this unbalanced model of development, what happens? We identify some places or some key sectors and we invest most of our resources in those key places or those key sectors, and we ultimately believe that there would be trickle down later on to other places and other sectors. Okay? So this is the model of development that we have today. So what is actually happening? Even the resources of Bihar are going where? We have developed various methods through which the resources of other areas can also be polarized into these growth pools. Okay? So can you understand how Gujarat, Maharashtra can become so much rich while other parts of the country cannot? We ultimately developed our banking services, and with the development of the banking services, what has happened? Even a person who is keeping his money in bank in Bihar, उसका पैसा लेकर के कौन भाग जाता है? Who is running away with that money? Who is using that money? It is these big corporates who are essentially, they are like taking the same money, your money, उसी money को उन्होंने borrow किया, and they are setting up industries and giving you job. What an irony. So people like Nitish, instead of crying, ultimately they should be fighting against a more just system, against a more equitable model of development, instead of just becoming puppet of these capitalists and the governments which are there. Okay? So very clearly, if you talk about what is happening, according to Smith, so Smith says that T.M. Smith says that all the societies have presence of social injustice. Presence of social injustice. And this, if you talk about, which is result of particular type of power relations of the society. As a result, what happens in a society? There is creation of winners and losers. Winners are those who get more goods than bads, while it is reverse in case of loser. These are those who get more bads than goods, and this ultimately this becomes the cause of inequality. This ultimately creates inequality in the society. And if you talk about this inequality, also has a spatial component. Because the distribution of goods and bads is unequally spatially distributed. Unequally spatially distributed. ठीक है. Thus, this spatial component creates what? This creates a situation of spatial inequality. So Smith says that study of this spatial inequality is the scope of welfare approach. In human geography. ठीक है. So can you understand this point of spatial inequality, how this spatial inequality is created? This is the way in which according to Smith, spatial inequality is ultimately created. And he also says that, he borrows in fact from welfare economics, and he says that the scope, this study can be defined in the terms, it can be more expressed in the following phrase. And this phrase is who gets what where and how. So this is the crux of the welfare approach in human geography. Okay. So the notion of welfare has been a subject in many constantly recurring debates, particularly on the question of who, what, where and how. According to Smith, the welfare geography is in positive sense is concerned with answering these questions. Thus, The first and the foremost aspect is defining what constitutes welfare. So all these things first have to be defined. So for example, question of what. So question of what tries to answer what constitutes utility and satisfaction, or in other words, it is just a question of what is that people attach value to. It is matter of individual and societal principles as to the desirable attribute of the quality of life. These can vary within nations as well as between them. However, there may be sufficient general consensus as to justify the selection of specific set of conditions which constitute the well-being of society. Okay, so what exactly is the well-being of the society? What do you mean by welfare? How you will be defining welfare? So for example, tell me, can I say that for us who are urban dwellers, if there is no electricity, suppose, chalo, electricity has become now more is something which is available, but even electricity, other things like take the case of internet. If there is no internet, can I say we'll question that government kuch nahi kar raha hai and what this is, and our life would become like nothing. So for us, definition of welfare is basically what? It includes the presence of internet. But can I say, if I go to a remote village in India where there is hardly internet and huge scale poverty, for them can we say welfare would also mean that or welfare for them, presence of internet or electricity उससे ज़्यादा ज़रूरी उनके लिए क्या है? That there should be food to eat. They require more primary health care. There is no hardly any school in those areas. So for them welfare is what? These basic amenities. So overall what we are trying to say that the definition of what would be highly variable from place to place. Even in time it would be variable. Okay? Despite this, can we say that we can reach to certain minimum standards of what should constitute welfare? Yes or no? If these minimum standards are not present, then we can say that people have no welfare. Like for example, tell me, defining the poverty line. We have defined the poverty line on the basis of calories consumed. So there is a minimum number of ultimately calories which should be consumed by the individual, and those who are unable to consume that are classified as poor or below poverty line. Okay? In fact, we have today created a more broader criteria to ultimately measure this, the minimum standard, like the multi-dimensional poverty index. So multi-dimensional poverty index takes into account various variables, income, etc., etc., the things which people possess. Okay? And on the basis of that, it ultimately qualifies some people as poor and others not. Okay? So can we say that at least some kind of generalization with respect to what constitutes welfare can be formulated? Okay? So Smith here tries to use what they have been doing in welfare economics, some quantitative methods. So for example, if we talk about here is the if we are measuring welfare, if we are talking about the question of what, okay? So suppose I define welfare into two aspects. One is the case of basic goods and other is luxury goods. Basic goods and luxury goods. Okay. So all societies have to determine how much they will be spending on basic goods and how much they would be spending in the luxury goods. Like in families also we decide. If you talk about a poor family, most of the spending of the poor family goes for what? For the basic needs, और goods के बजाय यहाँ पर लिख देते हैं needs. So this can be basic, or we can also call it as survival needs. So for a poor family, most of its spending, 80 to 90% even, goes for survival needs. For rich families, hardly the survival needs are 10 to 15%, and rest of the spending that they are doing there, that is mainly for their luxury needs. Okay, whatever be the ratio overall, can I say if I have 100 rupees, I cannot spend more than the 100 rupees? Yes or no? So any country, if you talk about, or any society or any region, has its own level of resources. Okay? And according to the level of resource that they have, there can be drawn a this is basically resource frontier. Resource frontier curve can be drawn. Okay. So for example, let us take this example. Suppose I take this point. So that means I am spending some 15% on basic needs and some 85% on luxury needs. I can take a more different shares of basic and luxury needs can be taken up here. But we have to ensure what? It doesn't exceed 100. It cannot exceed, because 100 is the limit. Can you understand what I am saying here? So this is the resource frontier curve. This is the maximum that the present level of technology and resource availability allows us. Okay? So that is one thing. Now there would be, in a society, there would be different value systems. Okay? So in a society, there would be a different type of value systems. So can we say that depending upon these value systems, we can place welfare contours. So this blue lines represent welfare contours. So tell me, welfare contours are essentially, they represent prevailing views or values with respect to utilization of resources. With respect to utilization of resources. So, see here, if I talk about W1, can I say W1, in this case, W1 is not feasible. Why? Because it is beyond the resource frontier curve. It is beyond the resource frontier curve. So, it is not feasible. Can you get what I am saying here? It is not feasible. So, here it is talking about that the resource is more than 100, तब जाकर के ये possible होगा. Because reality is we have this red line. This is the boundary of what the resources allows us. We cannot go beyond that. In W3, we can say it is not advisable. Why? Because, can I say, because it leads to underutilization of resources. So, you can see W3 is leading to underutilization of the resources. This much resources are not used if you essentially use W3. So, this cannot be also taken. So, here it is W2 is the chosen viewpoint. ठीक है. So, where it intersects with the resource frontier gives us the definition of welfare. Gives us the definition of welfare. So, for example, you can see here it is intersecting here. So, this will give us the definition of welfare. अब ये मेरा curve अच्छा नहीं है. This curve should have been better. So, if you make the curve better, it is something like 60-40 or 50-50 or 70-30 depending upon what type of viewpoints are prevailing in the society. Yes, it is similar to production possibility curve of economics, that resource frontier curve, that is production possibility curve itself. It is just here differently named. Okay. So, again that would give us the case of welfare. So, this will give us an idea of what should be included in welfare. How much should be the share of basic goods, basic needs, and how much should be the share which should be given to spent on the luxury needs. Okay. No, it is not all these are ideals. Okay. All these are ideals, and always you will create a criteria. When you are creating, you will always create on some ideal only that we require, that is minimum which is required. So, in this manner this W2 will tell us where it is intersecting, it will tell us how much of what should include the welfare. So very clearly, can you see one very important thing with Smith's welfare geography, that he is here trying to make it more objective, that we said before. He is for objectivity, he is standing for objectivity. He believes that if you really want to do mapping of welfare, you have to have objective criteria. Okay? So same thing, tell me. So this is the question of what. Can I say that this same thing I can apply if I am talking about the definition of who? So in the definition of who, tell me, can I say here on one side I can talk about like one segment of the society, like if I just say in American sense blacks, here we can talk about whites, इंडिया के सेंस में बैकवर्ड section including the SC/ST and forward caste, yes, privileged, underprivileged भी लिख सकते हैं. So again, how the resources should be distributed? It should be ultimately defined. So here again there would be resource frontier curve, and we can put how people would be distributed, how this distribution would be taking place. Okay? So for example, if I talk about forward backward classes, so suppose government has 100 seats which are to be distributed among the people. Okay? So tell me, can I say our definition of welfare in India, does it provides for reservation of these seats? In the distribution of the welfare, does it takes into account the historical injustice which has been done to some members of the society, and we want to correct that historical injustice, as a result of which there is reservation of seats? And again, there are number of views with respect to that. One view is a very too much idealistic view and says that okay, you give reservation to the backward classes, but increase number of seats. You provide more government employment, but government doesn't has the money to provide so much employment. So W1 is discarded. W3, the passive, the negative type of attitude where they totally disagree with the reservation, and they are saying that it should be very minimum because it distorts the competition, etc., etc. So again, it cannot be, it is in a way we are underutilizing our resources, which we can better distribute to achieve the goal of welfare. But W2 here is giving us a kind of ideal position where it should be. Like for example, अभी तो वो change हो गया है because उसमें number of additions, more reservation is being given now. Although you can understand many judgments are pending, so we'll see how it will evolve. But very clearly, if you go just before some time, Supreme Court had made it very clear that the reservation should not exceed 50% mark. Okay? So that was basically what this value was, the W2, on which we were deciding who will get how much good and how much bad. Can you understand what I am saying? So Smith says that even who, when we are talking about, can be objectively determined. ठीक है. And you same thing see in case of where भी यहाँ पर देखते हैं. So tell me, can I say here I can talk about developed states of India and here the backward states of India, and the resources that are present, they are to be divided in this forward and backward states. Like very recently there will be finance commission which would be formed, which would provide a new criteria of distribution of the resources, which would be going from center to the states. Okay. So again, this W2 would be determined by whom? It would be determined by the new finance commission of how much distribution there should be between backward and the developed states. Okay. So again, here also what you can do, you can ultimately determine more objectively, and each of these definitions arrived will also differ in space. So what we are determining what here in India might not be true in US, it might not be true in some other society. ठीक है. Like for example, suppose here we were determining what, अगर अब इसी में मैं what की बात करूं, so ratio of wheat and rice, suppose, can I say we arrive at a particular ratio which should be there between the distribution of wheat and rice? Can I say what would be agreed in the north might not be agreed in the southern states? Yes or no? Because their eating or consumption habits are different. So there will be spatial variations. But Smith says despite these spatial variations, we can find common elements and we can arrive at a common definition of welfare, like we have done in case of HDI and other various such parameters. Okay. So who in a society where there is presence of variety of individuals and groups, a society can be broadly classified on the criteria of demography, ethnicity, class groupings. For example, Indian society broadly divided into APL, BPL, or into majority minority distinctions on the basis of caste and race, religion, economic conditions, etc. Okay. The question of who tries to answer how much of the welfare needs to be allocated to different sections of the society, who gets what. If you talk about where, the question of where is the contribution of geographers to the welfare approach. It raises the question of spatial inequality and spatial diversity. Spatial question assumes critical importance when the issue is of distribution. For example, distribution of apparently underdeveloped areas, distribution for underdeveloped areas. Hence, the welfare approach tries to highlight the problems of inter and intra-regional inequality, which was missing in welfare economics. So, answering the question of where also assumes significance because there exists spatial variability in answer to the question of what and who. Okay. So, these are the basic aspects of welfare geography, welfare approach. In the initial phase, welfare approach primarily confined itself to the mainstream economics and emphasis remained on consumption to answer the questions of what. However, such focus on consumption was later challenged by none other than Smith. So Smith himself became critical. So he criticized himself, खुद को ही गालियां बकने लगा कि what I have been doing and we have been very narrow in our approach, we should expand, we have been more economical, but welfare is more than economics. ठीक है. So Smith himself, none other than Smith himself, who devised a critique of traditional welfare geography, which is modeled on welfare economics. For example, he remarked, the early preoccupation of welfare geography with welfare economics based upon the neoclassical principle later gave way to a more broad definition of welfare. Thus, the economic criteria were replaced by the criteria of social well-being. So, we'll see later on in population geography, there is one topic, social well-being. So, there we'll talk about the social well-being criteria which was developed by D.M. Smith. ठीक है. So, replaced by social well-being parameters which are defined in terms of societal good and bad measured in territorial social indicators experienced as utilities or disutilities by people living in different territories relative to their predetermined general level. So, he became more broad based while he was defining this welfare. I'll just show you. You see here. This will be later doing in population geography. So, Smith's general criteria of social well-being. So, you see here, social well-being is much more broad based than just economic. So, it includes physical well-being, environmental conditions such as climatic variations, local topographical variations, physical density, physical and mental health, material well-being, household assets, including the modern electronic gadgets and other means of conveyance and communications, social well-being, social health, social security, social amenities, social relations including the social ethos, economic well-being, employment opportunities, level of income, saving, purchasing power, consumption of goods and services, perception of well-being, attitude towards the external living and non-living things, individual social traits, experience of real world situations, element of subjectivity, spiritual well-being, religious beliefs, practices, taboos, various approaches to seek eternal truth and happiness. So, all of these are what? They are important for the individual. So, Smith in fact devised a criteria which included income, wealth, employment, living environment which included housing, neighborhood, physical environment, health which included not only physical but also mental health, ठीक है, education, achievement, duration and quality, social order, personal pathologies, family breakdown, crime and delinquency, public order and safety. All these were basically part and parcel. Social belongingness, democratic participation, criminal justice, segregation, recreation and leisure, recreation facilities, culture and the art, leisure available. So many variables were included later on by D.M. Smith to define what is welfare. So, he later, earlier welfare was more for him in the first phase. Welfare was more related with economic growth. But in the second phase later, it ultimately became what? welfare for Smith more became development. And development, we'll later see, is much more broad than economic growth. ठीक है. Then the question of how. So, how refers to the processes which lead to observed inequalities. It concerns itself to study of manner in which society allocates its resources between the production of different goods and bads and distributes them between individuals or groups identified by the area of residence. It is purely a technical matter which depends upon politico-economic structure of the society or country. Okay? For example, this how, broadly speaking, there are two main methods of this how. One is what we call it as the market based mechanism and other is the planned economy. So, these are two ends of the spectrum. We know very well that none of the actual societies, economies lie at the extreme end. All of them are somewhere in between. None of them are fully planned. None of them are fully market based. Okay? So, again, there can be various forms of how which can be used by different countries. Okay? So, it is a more political type of matter. Now, tell me, if it is more political, would Smith have been interested in how? Would he have been interested in how? Yes or no? Very clearly no. And why? Why? The primary reason was very clear, because welfare geographers wanted to remain neutral. They didn't want to do what was they felt domain of policymakers, politics. Okay? They didn't want to do that. They didn't want to involve in those questions. Their belief was that the system existing is okay, only it needs some fine tuning, and with liberal methods like taxation, etc., we would be able to create a just society, a more equal society. Okay? So, very clearly, in the initial phase, Smith was not much interested in development of how. Primary reason was that he was firm believer in the capitalistic system. Okay? But very clearly we will see that what happened, he continued to argue his case for almost 2 decades, nobody heard him. And all the things, the welfare mapping that he highlighted, nothing was done much to solve the problem of inequality. As a result, by late 80s, he also ran out of patience. And ultimately, by late 80s, he began to feel that dealing with how was also important, because there must be some problem in the how. That is why the problems are not being solved. So, he ultimately understood that there is something in the how the things are arranged. Suppose in India, dekho, no matter what perception they create, all intelligent people जिनकी आंखें खुली हुई हैं, and they are not blinded by their religion, they are not blinded by their caste system, they can very clearly see कि हो क्या रहा है. There are bunch of individuals with their puppets, and they are trying to become the modern kings and trying to a kind of do modern enslaved slavery systems they are trying to create. Otherwise, you can understand it is like a joke that in the same period our economy has not been doing well. Our richest person has gone from top 30 to top 5 richest person in the world. There, if you talk about unki economy is not affected, only our economy is affected. And it is absolutely true. So if someone says that no, we will just highlight the problems and we will not solve the problem and we don't have anything to do with the politics, there is no problem in the system. If someone says like this, I can just have a pity for that person. There is a very clear nexus which we can see. They ultimately privatized the media to ensure that ultimately they would have control over the social system. This experiment first was conducted in America. They were very successful, and ultimately they are now making it more global experiment. Everywhere they are buying media and controlling the public perception. So that is basically what was also finally understood by Smith. So it is written here, you can see, in the initial phase, welfare geographers, including Smith, kept themselves at distance from the question of how. They felt that the question of how belonged to the exclusive domain of policymakers because of its technical nature. However, earlier preoccupation with descriptive results subsequently gave way to a more process-oriented work on how inequality arises. Okay? So it is same thing which was happening in behavior geography. Do you remember? In behavior, they were first just concerned with, they were happy with the pattern mapping. Here also they were more happy with just what aspect of the inequality. Later on, they also started to investigate into the causes which were leading to this inequality. Okay? And consequence of this was that researchers needed to consider the operation of economic, social and political systems as an integrated whole in order to reveal its general tendencies. This inevitably brought the tendency to study structures. पहले भी बताया स्ट्रक्चरल ज्योग्राफी के बारे में, स्ट्रक्चरल अप्रोच. Marxism was a structural approach which talks about how the below structures, invisible structures, are controlling the visible structures. Okay? So with this, ultimately structures started to be studied even in the welfare approach. Okay? However, in doing so, researchers like Smith ensured that geography of welfare must go beyond Marxian political economy to encompass a range of socio-cultural processes. So Marxian की problem क्या थी? For them, everywhere capitalism is bad. So anywhere capitalism is, it is bad. It is not necessary. How you apply a system, that is also very important. In which type of society it is applied, that is also very important. If it is applied in a very, you can say, aware, educated society, maybe it will yield good results, like Scandinavian societies you see. It has yielded good result, high level of equality. These are the societies where least inequalities are found and there is very high level of human development to be found. But if you apply a capitalistic system to people who, जिनको मतलब you can understand कि बताना पड़ता है कि भाई you don't have to go outside, you have to do it inside your house, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. So the society which is at this level, you can understand that a bunch of rich, powerful, intelligent capitalists, how they can mold them. And if you don't have a controlling systems, it would lead to catastrophes. Because people are not so much intelligent with respect to these new type of systems, this Western type of system. They are more innocent. They are less educated. So as a result, it is not necessary that one system would always lead to bad results. So they didn't had this Marxian political leaning. But very clearly we can say that they ultimately had also started to deal in structures. So they moved closer to structuralism. In fact, by 1990s, we will see that ultimately what happened, they merged into structuralism. Welfare geography ultimately merged into structuralism. Okay? So you'll understand this point when we'll talk about structuralism. So by 1990s, what happened? It hardly remained a independent branch, and it became part and parcel of structuralism, because they all found that they were talking about the same thing. Ultimately, they understood it is this problem, the structural problem is the case. Okay? So this is basically the case of welfare approach. Critical assessment पे आते हैं. In decade of 1980s, welfare geography came under criticism from outside as well as from inside. So insiders like Smith highlighted the narrowness in the approach of welfare geography initially with respect to the question of what constitute welfare, and later with its inactiveness to the question of how. From outside, it has been criticized by Marxist geographers who saw geographers taking credit for highlighting problems of inequality, but doing nothing to provide solutions to these problems. They saw welfare geographers as hypocrites who were afraid to take up the questions of solving inequality by fighting against establishment. In fact, Marxists like Harvey, they were very severely critical of welfare geography. In fact, one of his statements in one of the lectures he was giving, he was so much brutal in criticism. He said that while the welfare geographers are busy in their intellectual masturbation, we are here fighting with the establishment. So they were very, very critical because they understood, because according to them, they very clearly could see that welfare geographers knew about the problem, but they didn't have the courage to highlight the problem because they were more concerned about themselves. Because they were more concerned about the funds, the research funds which they were getting. That was more important to them. ठीक है? More importantly, इसमें लिखा नहीं हुआ है, तो let us a little bit write about this criticism. One important criticism of welfare geography is that James Smith sought to make welfare geography an objective approach so as to solve the problems of society. However, it can be argued that questions of welfare are very subjective and dynamic. Very subjective and dynamic. Each of the variables used are characterized by high level of subjectivity and dynamism. If we talk about example, let us take the case of what. So tell me, can I say what constitutes welfare is very subjective and variable with respect to space and time. It is highly variable with respect to space and time. ठीक है? So tell me, can I say that, for example, if I talk about अभी हमने एक एग्जाम्पल दिया था, what is the case of remote isolated village welfare definition is very different from the metropolitan city definition of welfare. In fact, this definition is fast changing. Fast changing with time. What was earlier seen as luxury is today seen as necessity. Example you take, availability or access to internet. Today we take it as what? One of the basic rights which should be granted to the people. Okay? So again, that is very important. Also, thus we can say that the definition of welfare is tied to the level of technology and social development. So it is tied to level of technology and social development, which also is spatially variable, which has high spatial variability. Also, if you talk about the question of welfare, is variable with respect to age, sex, class, faith, caste, etc. For example, take the case of sex. Can we say that the needs of women are quite different from that of men? In fact, it has been argued by feminists. So, question arises, how when there is so much diversity in the society, in so much diverse society, how can an objective general criteria of welfare be identified? Would provide social justice and equality. Social justice and equality. Yes or no? Tell me. Maybe we can say that, suppose if we make welfare as economic and we ultimately are able to increase the income of all the people, but can you make sure that that person is happy? Can we be sure? Maybe he is unhappy. I gave you that example of Terry Dam. If you ask that person, he felt like injustice has been done to him, and if it was in his power, basically he would want his earlier situation back. Okay? So again, there is high possibility that such kind of general welfare definitions can lead to what? They can lead to creation of even more inequalities, some kind of social injustice. So the question is, solving such social injustice would require more individualistic criteria, more variable criteria rather than this kind of general criteria. You can understand this criticism comes from the humanists. Similarly, if you talk about the question of other questions like who. So, can I say this definition also has been very changeable? Changeable. So, if you talk about, can I say, if we go in the earlier period, in the ancient medieval times, can I say only few individuals were treated as humans, all others were treated more or less as slaves or animals? Yes or no? Then we ultimately abolished slavery, but still there are tribal societies which are not given equal treatment. Still they are there. You can understand that movie Avatar. Have you seen that movie? It is essentially based upon the same idea. How much discrimination is being done with the tribals? Okay, so this definition is highly changing. In fact, you can understand, you must have seen, some of you might have seen, have you seen that movie TED 2? देखा है? One movie I am talking about is Avatar, and second movie I am talking about is TED 2. So if you have seen that TED 2 movie, you might have seen, it is the essence of this, what we are talking about, who. So in TED 2, basically teddy bear, it is, if you have seen, it is the story of the teddy bear. So teddy bear is basically what? He is, there is some kind of fight which is going on, and ultimately a situation arises where it is to be decided whether he will be given human rights or not. Because that teddy bear is speaking teddy bear, it seems to have life. Okay, so the whole story revolves around this teddy bear, and very beautifully in the end, it is in the, I think, the voice of Morgan Freeman, it is basically describing that ultimately because the teddy bear showed those emotions which only humans can show. Thus, he has human rights. So this movie was actually highlighting what is evolving the concept of humanness today. ठीक है, इसी तरह से एक सीरीज है, वेब सीरीज है, उसका मैंने फर्स्ट पार्ट देखा था, बट फर्स्ट सीजन, बट आफ्टर दैट आई डिडंट गेट टाइम. सो अब तक तो काफ़ी सीजन आ गए होंगे उसके. एंड इट वाज, द नेम ऑफ द वेब सीरीज वाज वेस्ट वर्ल्ड. So in this, what they do, they are making robots, humanoid robots, and they are totally looking like humans, and they are experimenting with, they are not telling those robots that they are not humans, they are robots, and they are essentially experimenting whether they will get consciousness ultimately, whether even if they are reprogrammed, will they remember their past. And it is shown that some of the robots do develop consciousness. Even after reprogramming, they actually remember their past. So this is what is evolving conception of humanness. So is the human rights available only to the human beings? Yes, Maze Runner में भी है. So is those human rights, are those human rights only applicable to human beings, or are they applicable to others, other life forms? So today you can understand we are also extending the rights to other life forms. In fact, even non-living things. So you know, Ganga has been given status of a human being, a living being. So very clearly you can understand who also is highly changeable with time. What today you are not including. For example, in the development, today you don't include the aspect of destruction of environment. Tomorrow that would change. It is already changing. So how you can say that you will be providing a just welfare? ठीक है. Similarly, you take other example, you take the case of Gates. Yes, we are already talking about the environmental impact assessment. So if you talk about Gates, question again arises, Gates For how much time? For how much time? Whether it is for only certain period or lifetime. Certain period or lifetime. Again, a very subjective concept. For example, the SIM card that is there in my mobile phone, that SIM card was sold to me by these mobile companies as a lifetime SIM card. That means only I had to spend, if I wanted to do talking and for outgoing calls. With respect to validity, the validity would never expire. That was the promise which was made to me. But have you seen that now what is happening with all these mobile companies? What they have done? Every month they are cutting money as the monthly validity. So can you see how the concept of gets has changed with respect to that mobile? We have rights, variety of type of rights with us. But will those rights be always available to us? We don't know. अभी you can see Supreme Court ने बोल दिया कि we are trying to discourage some of the fundamental rights applications. And it is so much absurd. Supreme Court is there to guarantee fundamental rights of the people. Yes, Article 32. So will those rights be always there for the people, or will they be suspended for some time? In what time they would be suspended? Like, so many fundamental rights can be suspended during emergency, except right to life. Or will they be us with life for lifetime? We don't know. Again, these questions are too much subjective. ठीक है, same thing if you talk about where. If you talk about where, can we say that even this definition of where would be changeable? It is changeable with time. अभी हमने एग्जाम्पल दिया था, if you remember, of Bihar. So earlier, before British period, Bihar was what? It was very prosperous state, prosperous region. After British, it has become what? It has become a backward region. It has become a backward region. You take a more recent example. You take the case of Punjab. Can I say up to very recent time, Punjab was the most developed agricultural state? Of India, which still has high per capita income? Yes or no? But if you look just back into past few years of Punjab, have you seen that in the past few years Punjab has been suffering problems of farmers' suicide, very big problem emerging in case of Punjab. There is big problem of indebtedness arising in Punjab. In fact, in the last assembly elections which were held, there was a big issue of loan waiver. It was one of the big issues. So what is the need for Punjab ultimately to have this kind of loan waiver? It was one of the most developed states of India. Why it needs loan waiver? So much rich farmers. And can you see how much right now in Punjab is disturbed because of the farm laws which have been passed? And probably if this continues like this, maybe Punjab will lose its status of being that developed state. Per capita income might not be able to keep pace. So again, when we are talking about the question of where, there is also high amount of subjectivity involved. Okay? And even in the question of how, can we say that it is highly variable? It is more situational. There cannot be one single way of providing welfare. One single way of providing welfare. Because every situation is different from each other. Even if we are talking about same place, after some time similar looking problem will be different from the previous one, and it might require different type of solutions. A more tailor-made solutions are required rather than general solutions. Okay? So very clearly, most of the things which Smith talks about objectivity of welfare are actually highly subjective. And till we recognize this subjectivity, what will happen? Can you understand that the idea which Smith presents here seem to be highly Eurocentric. Welfare geography would remain what? Eurocentric. It has to become what? Area oriented. It has to become situation oriented. And HDI and all these are basically what? They are too much Eurocentric concepts. Someone who is not educated, who is not literate more specifically, is not necessarily a person who is backward. You cannot call him as backward. We know so many people are there in the villages who are not educated, but they are very intelligent, they are very efficient, they are working hard every day, they are earning decent living standards, they are very happy with life, they are contributing very positively to the society. Then how you can say that that person is not developed? So most of the concepts, if you talk about, these are what? They are highly Eurocentric in nature. Okay? So this is basically the problem, main problem with the welfare approach. Despite these shortcomings, welfare geography is credited with bringing back the question of philanthropic humanism to the focus of geographical studies. Yes, that is the thing. That is one thing which we have to understand. And that is why so many people, so much of committees, commissions have so much talked about decentralization. Our decentralization has been what? It has been like just a show off. This is why we need decentralization. Okay. So it was able to bring back the question of philanthropic humanism. It tried to reorient geography into a functional discipline which not only challenged the asocial quantitative approach but also challenged too much of social orientation and historical orientation in humanistic and structural geographies. It focused on significant aspects of social life, thus it brought back what can be referred to as human in human geography. It provided a synthesis where different approaches like areal differentiation approach and spatial science approach can come together to provide solution to the problems of society. We have already seen how quantitative approach and areal differentiation approach he tried to show and merge. While answering the question of who gets what, where and how, welfare geographers imported context and explanations. They imported context and explanations from various disciplinary fields. Thus, welfare geography made geography highly multidimensional in nature. Welfare geography rose to prominence in the late 1980s following a crisis phase in human geography. However, it could not sustain its status and soon merged with other forms of critical inquiries in geography with structuralism. ठीक है. So in crisis phase welfare was very dominant because welfare का काम ही क्या था? Criticize करना. Marxists were very correct when they were saying that they are just highlighting the problem without giving any solution to the problems. So during the crisis phase, you can understand the critiques would be very much at the helm of things. So welfare was that time again rose to prominence in criticizing the prevailing approaches of behavioral, humanistic and the structuralist radical approaches. But clearly it could not sustain its status and soon in 90s it merged basically with structuralism itself. Okay. So there are two questions. Both of them have been, no, one has not been asked, second one has not been asked, but first one has been asked. So welfare phase of geography makes it interdisciplinary subject. Elaborate. And एक क्वेश्चन और ये पूछा है, welfare geography emphasizes spatial inequality and territorial justice. Comment with reference to Smith. यही था क्वेश्चन आई थिंक. Comment with reference to Smith. So इसको कल करेंगे. Tomorrow we'll do this. ठीक है. You try this at home. इसको brainstorm करो. All these three questions. Tomorrow we'll do that. ठीक है. So we'll stop for today. Good night to all of you.